For thousands of years, ancient sailors crossed entire oceans with no modern tools. They relied on a profound understanding of the natural world to guide them, a skill we have almost entirely forgotten today. By the end of this journey, you will see the sea and sky through their eyes, discovering a lost art of navigation that connected the world. How did they detect invisible islands just by feeling the motion of their boat? What secret messages were written in the flight patterns of birds? This knowledge wasn't just about survival. It was about conversing with the environment on a level we can barely comprehend now. What part of our own connection to the natural world have we sacrificed for convenience? Long before European ships ever dreamed of crossing the Atlantic, the Lapita people were already conquering the Pacific. They set out in elegant outrigger canoes, vessels that seem impossibly fragile against the world's largest ocean. Their story is not one of reckless drifting, but of intentional, brilliant expansion. They faced a triple threat of unpredictable weather, unimaginable distances, and the profound psychological weight of the unknown. To sail beyond the sight of land was to enter a realm of pure faith in one's own knowledge. Maritime historians emphasize these were not gambles but calculated missions. Their success, mirrored in the Phoenicians who crisscrossed the Mediterranean and the Polynesians who settled islands from Hawaii to New Zealand, proves their methods were anything but primitive. How did a person steel their nerves to leave one island with no guarantee of ever finding another? The answer lies not in a single trick but in a complete, living conversation with the world around them. They learned to read the ocean itself as a vast, dynamic map. The first compass was not an object, but the ocean itself. Ancient sailors felt the rhythm of the sea through the very planks of their boats, interpreting the long, rolling waves known as swells as a living map. These swells, generated by far-off weather systems, provided a constant directional reference. A steady, consistent pattern from the east meant you could hold your course. A sudden shift or a new, interfering rhythm signaled a change, sometimes pointing the way to land long before it was visible. This art was known as wave piloting. Polynesian navigators, for example, became masters of reading reflected swells. They could detect the subtle bounce back of waves from an island dozens of miles away, a faint echo in the water that whispered of a landmass just beyond the horizon. They categorized swells with precision. Ground swells traveling vast distances with powerful, organized energy spoke of stable conditions. The shorter, choppier wind swells told of local weather and recent storms. And the all-important reflected swells were the secret signatures of invisible islands. On overcast nights when the stars were hidden, a navigator would sometimes lie down in the canoe, closing his eyes to heighten his remaining senses. He would feel the vessel's gentle pitch and roll, discerning the complex interplay of wave patterns through his body alone. This was not a skill learned in a month or a year. It demanded a lifetime of observation, a profound sensory connection to the sea that transformed chaotic motion into a clear, navigable highway. What would it mean for us to listen so intently to our environment, to hear the stories told by the wind and water? This deep, physical conversation with the ocean was just the beginning, a foundation that directed their gaze upward to the next great guide written across the heavens. Above this world of shifting water was a sky of fixed and dependable lights. For ancient mariners, the night was not a time of blindness but of clarity, when the stars revealed their true nature as a grand celestial clockwork. They did not need printed charts because they carried a perfect, dynamic map in their minds. Their method was to memorize the precise points on the horizon where certain key stars and constellations would rise and set. In the vast darkness of the open ocean, these points became their cardinal directions. If you knew that a particular bright star always rose directly in the path to your homeland, you simply kept your bow pointed toward that spot on the eastern horizon each night. The North Star, Polaris, was the anchor of the northern heavens. Because it sits almost directly above the Earth's north pole, it remains nearly motionless throughout the night, a fixed point around which all other stars appear to slowly turn. For a sailor in the northern hemisphere, locating Polaris instantly revealed which way was north, but this was only the beginning. The true masters of the Pacific developed a more sophisticated system known as the star compass. Micronesian navigators, for instance, did not think in terms of 4 directions, but 32. They mentally divided the entire horizon into a circle of sectors, each one defined by the rising or setting point of a specific star. One house of the compass was marked by the rising of the star Altair, another by the setting of the Pleiades cluster. A navigator would stand in the center of this invisible compass, feeling its orientation shift as the night progressed, constantly updating his mental map of the sky. This knowledge was a sacred treasure passed down through generations in elaborate chants and through years of rigorous apprenticeship. A Polynesian navigator knew dozens of these steering stars, each one relevant for a different season or a specific voyage between islands. Oral histories tell of masters who could name every star that would guide them on a journey from Tahiti to Hawaii, a chain of celestial stepping stones across 2,500 miles of empty ocean. This raises a profound question. The stars are not perfectly fixed. Over centuries, a slow wobble in the Earth's axis, called precession, causes the positions of the stars to drift. The star we call Polaris was not always the North Star. So how did these long oral traditions remain accurate? The answer lies in the system's living nature. It was not a rigid, written doctrine but an adaptable body of knowledge. Each generation of masters would subtly adjust the star compass, refining the rising points based on their own lived observations, ensuring the celestial map remained true. The stars were their nightly guides, but as dawn broke, another, more relentless celestial body took over, dictating the rhythm of the entire day. As the stars faded with the dawn, the sun offered its own reliable guidance. This daily journey across the sky was far more than a source of light. It was a brilliant, moving compass. Ancient mariners learned to track its precise position from sunrise to sunset, turning its predictable arc into a tool for orientation. At sunrise, the sun marked an almost true east, and at sunset, a near west. But the most critical moment came at local noon, when the sun reached its highest point directly to the south for those in the northern hemisphere. This solar apex was their anchor point for the entire day. One of the simplest and most powerful tools for harnessing this knowledge was the shadow stick. By planting a vertical pole in the ground, a navigator could read the story written in its shadow. The shortest shadow of the day pointed unequivocally north, while the direction and length of the shadow provided a continuous readout of both time and approximate latitude. A longer shadow meant they were farther from the equator. A shorter shadow meant they were closer. Egyptian and Phoenician sailors crossing the Mediterranean became masters of this solar dance. They correlated the sun's highest daily point with their north-south position, allowing them to sail a consistent latitude by simply keeping the noon sun at a fixed angle above the horizon. This required a profound mental model of the sky. They had to internalize how the sun's path shifted with the seasons, rising and setting farther to the south in the winter and farther to the north in the summer. Planning a long voyage meant understanding these celestial rhythms intimately. choosing a time of year when the sun's path would best serve their intended route. Archaeoastronomers point out that this knowledge was often integrated with the land itself. Temples, stone circles, and other landmarks were frequently aligned with key solar positions, serving as permanent cultural calibration points for sailors departing from or returning to a familiar coast. The sun provided a daily, repeating clock, but to truly understand the grand patterns of the sea, they had to listen to another, even more powerful force, the voice of the wind itself. The wind on a sailor's face was never just wind. It was a current of information, a flowing map written in pressure and temperature that spoke of distant lands and coming storms. Ancient mariners learned to read this invisible language with the same fluency we read text, distinguishing the steady, global rhythms from the fleeting local breezes. The most reliable of these were the great wind highways, predictable systems that shaped human history. In the Pacific, the Polynesians harnessed the powerful trade winds, steady easterlies that provided a consistent, powerful push for their epic voyages across the ocean's vast expanse. Across the Indian Ocean, Arab and Swahili traders structured their entire commercial calendar around the monsoons. For 6 months, the winds would blow steadily from the northeast, carrying their laden house from Arabia to Africa. Then they would wait, and when the winds reversed to the southwest, it was the signal to load their ships with new cargo and begin the long journey home. This was not mere sailing, it was a dance with the planet's own breathing. But beyond these grand patterns lay a more immediate and vital skill, the ability to forecast the weather itself. A sudden drop in wind, an unnatural calm, could be the prelude to a violent squall. They learned to read the sky's architecture, recognizing that low, fast-moving clouds meant rain was near, while high, wispy cirrus clouds could warn of a major weather system still days away. The air itself carried secrets. A seasoned navigator might take a deep breath, detecting the faint, earthy scent of vegetation or the distinct smell of mud from a river delta long before any land was visible. A phenomenon we now know is caused by airborne spores and pollen. Historical logs from countless cultures describe how a shift in the wind's character, a new chill or a sudden warmth, could signal an approaching island or a change in ocean current. This profound knowledge was empirical, earned through generations of lived experience, and then encoded into songs, chants, and proverbs that encapsulated complex meteorological wisdom in simple, memorable lines. Misreading these signs was not a simple error, it was a potentially fatal mistake. A captain who confused a local sea breeze for the onset of a seasonal wind could find himself blown hundreds of miles off course into the open ocean with dwindling supplies. Understanding the wind was essential, but the most hopeful signs were often the lives it carried. To find their way, sailors learned to trust the messengers of the air, the birds that flew with a purpose they could not see. A lone tern skimming the waves was not just a bird, it was a living arrow pointing toward salvation. Ancient mariners understood that the behavior of birds provided one of the most reliable signs of invisible land, transforming the empty horizon into a map filled with potential destinations. They paid close attention to specific species, knowing that birds like terns and boobies have a limited flight range from their nesting grounds. Spotting a booby, which rarely ventures more than 40 or 50 miles from land, meant an island was almost certainly within a day's sail. The true mastery, however, lay in reading their daily routines. At dawn, navigators would watch carefully for flocks flying out from a specific point on the horizon, heading to their fishing grounds for the day. In the evening, they would observe those same birds returning, their flight paths converging like lines on a map to reveal the location of their home. This was not a guess, it was a calculated deduction based on years of accumulated knowledge about local avifauna. In the Pacific, this understanding was codified into a precise science. Navigators knew that the long-tailed koyo bird flew no more than 20 miles from shore, while the great frigate bird could range over 100 miles, its presence indicating a much larger landmass. Expert ornithologists now confirm that ancient sailors even used migratory patterns for longer, seasonal voyages, timing their departures to follow the great flyways of birds they knew were heading toward the same lands they sought. This practice was not confined to the Pacific. Viking sagas tell of Floki Vilhjaldason, a Norse explorer who used ravens to find Iceland. After sailing west from Norway for days with no sight of land, he released one of the birds he carried on his ship. The raven, sensing the nearness of Earth, flew straight toward the horizon, and Floki simply followed its path, eventually making landfall. This method demanded an intimate, almost symbiotic relationship with the natural world. It required knowing not just what a bird looked like, but its habits, its range, and its very purpose in the moment you saw it. What does this deep reliance on animal behavior reveal? It shows a world where humans were not separate from nature, but active participants in a constant, silent conversation. They saw themselves as part of an ecosystem where every creature, from the highest flyer to the deepest swimmer, could offer a clue to survival. Just as birds painted a picture of the world above the waves, the ocean's depths held its own set of moving signposts. The ocean itself teemed with life that spoke a clear, discernible language to those who knew how to listen. Beneath the shimmering surface, the color and clarity of the water told a continuous story. A sudden shift from the deep, pure blue of the open ocean to a murky greenish hue often signaled the proximity of land, indicating shallow waters stirred up by reefs or the nutrient-rich outflow of a river. Patches of floating seaweed or drifting land-based debris like branches or fruit were not seen as random flotsam. They were considered confident signs, nature's own trail markers pointing toward a nearby coast. For sailors in the vast Pacific, where islands could be mere specks in an immense blue desert, these clues were not just helpful, they were vital. Polynesian navigators became master ecologists of their seascape. They knew that certain species of dolphin and whale followed specific, predictable migration routes that often ran directly between island chains. By observing these marine mammals, they could effectively follow an underwater highway laid out by nature itself. Their knowledge was incredibly specific, distinguishing between the seasonal paths of humpback whales and the more localized travels of pilot pods. At night, another phenomenon offered guidance. Mediterranean and Arabian sailors documented using the ghostly glow of bioluminescent plankton. When disturbed by the movement of water, these tiny organisms would light up, creating shimmering trails in the vessel's wake. A skilled navigator could read the direction and flow of these glowing currents, understanding how they interacted with the larger, invisible forces moving the sea. This created a multi-sensory web of confirmation. The feel of the swell under the hull, the sight of a specific bird at dusk, the taste of the air, and the color of the water all had to align to paint a coherent picture of their position. How did a novice learn to differentiate a true navigational sign from a random event? This discernment was the core of their training, a rigorous apprenticeship that could last for decades. They learned through endless repetition, through stories and chants, and through direct experience on the water until this knowledge became as instinctual as breathing. They were not just reading the ocean, they were in constant dialogue with it, interpreting a living map written in light, life, and color. And just as the sea's surface reflected the world below, the sky above mirrored the secrets of the world to come. Even the clouds were not silent to an ancient navigator. High in the sky, specific cloud formations held secrets that betrayed the presence of land long before it broke the horizon. The most telling of these was the stationary cumulus cloud, a seemingly innocent puff of white that refused to drift with the others. These land clouds form when the sun heats an island, causing warm air to rise and condense into a persistent cap of cloud over the landmass, even if that land was still 50 or 100 miles away. A navigator scanning the empty sea would see a line of clouds moving with the wind, and one that stood still, anchored to an invisible point below. That stationary cloud was not just a weather pattern, it was a direct arrow pointing to a destination. Pacific navigators refined this art to an incredible degree. They learned to read the color and shape of these clouds to estimate what kind of island lay beneath. A high, dark-based cloud with a towering structure often indicated a large, mountainous volcanic island like Tahiti or Hawaii. A lower, lighter, and more spread-out cloud bank might signal a flat coral atoll, its lagoon reflecting a distinctive greenish or turquoise tint onto the cloud base. This was not guesswork, it was a sophisticated visual science. Meteorological analysis confirms that cloud patterns over islands are fundamentally different. The rising thermals from land create more vertically developed clouds, while the relatively uniform temperature of the open ocean produces more layered horizontal formations. This knowledge was memorized through relentless observation, turning the sky into a three-dimensional chart. In the Caribbean, sailors told stories of how a certain faint yellow glow in the underside of distant clouds reliably pointed the way to the shallow banks of the Bahamas, a reflection of the sun on the white sand and seagrass below. How did the human mind manage to encode and recall such a vast library of subtle atmospheric cues without a single written note? The answer lies in a form of memory that was deeply associative and spatial. A navigator did not just memorize a list of cloud types, he wove them into stories and songs that connected the cloud's appearance to the feel of the waves, the smell of the air, and the stars of the night before. Each cloud was a single character in a much larger environmental narrative. These aerial hints were powerful, but the final, physical confirmation of land almost always came from a sensation far closer to home, from the very motion of the boat beneath their feet. The most profound navigation happened not with the eyes but with the entire body. Picture a Marshallese navigator lying in the hull of his canoe, his eyes closed, his mind quiet. He is not sleeping, he is listening with his skin and bones to the story the ocean is telling. He feels the gentle, rhythmic pitch and roll of the vessel, the primary swell generated by a distant storm. Then, beneath that steady motion, he detects something else, a faint, almost imperceptible shudder in the canoe's movement. This is a reflected swell, an echo. The primary wave has traveled dozens of miles, struck the invisible slope of an island or a submerged reef, and bounced back, carrying the secret of that landmass with it. This is wave piloting, a skill refined to its highest form by the sailors of the Marshall Islands. They learned to read this complex interplay of swells, interpreting how they bent or refracted around undersea mountains and how they echoed from atolls. To teach this invisible geography, they created some of history's most unique maps, the stick charts. These were not charts to be held up to the light and followed like a paper map. Constructed from palm ribs tied together with cord and adorned with shells to represent islands, they were abstract diagrams of wave patterns. A curved stick might show how a swell bends around an atoll. The intersection of two sticks could represent the confused, choppy sea where two wave patterns collided. A student navigator would sit with his master, feeling the motion of the boat while running his hands over the stick chart, learning to connect the physical sensation in his body with the abstract model in his lap. The real map, however, was never the stick chart. It was the perfectly calibrated mental model carried in the navigator's mind, a map written in muscle memory and vestibular sense. Modern practitioners who have tried to learn this art describe it as a feeling knowledge, something that defies easy documentation in a book. It relies on a tactile and inner ear sensitivity built over a lifetime on the water. This profound skill granted them a form of vision that pierced through darkness and fog. On overcast, moonless nights when the stars offered no guidance, the navigator could still find his way by feeling the sea's pulse. He was a living instrument tuned to the ocean's vibrations. Today, this knowledge stands on a fragile precipice. Only a handful of elders retain the full depth of this art. Its potential loss is not just the disappearance of a technique, but the fading of an entire way of knowing, a testament to a human capability we have almost forgotten. This deep, physical conversation with the sea was one half of a greater whole. To complete their journey, these masters had to perform one final, incredible feat of the mind, constructing and holding a perfect map of the world inside their heads. That final, perfect map existed only in the mind. Ancient navigators carried entire oceans within their memories, vast mental charts of star paths, swell patterns, and island sequences, all preserved and transmitted through a powerful, living oral tradition. This was not a simple list of directions but a dynamic cognitive masterpiece. The Polynesians, for instance, used elaborate chants that wove together navigation instructions with genealogy and mythology. A single chant might encode the precise sequence of steering stars for a voyage from Tahiti to Hawaii, the distinctive wave pattern to expect upon approaching a specific atoll, and the names of the ancestral explorers who first discovered the route. These chants were not merely recited, they were performed, their rhythmic cadence and melodic structure acting as mnemonic triggers, locking complex, multi-sensory information into a form that was both unforgettable and easily transmitted across generations. Anthropologists studying these traditions note that for the regions these sailors knew intimately, these mental maps were often far more accurate than the first crude maps drawn by European explorers, which frequently misrepresented entire archipelagos. The Norse used a different but equally effective technique, describing coastal features through poetic metaphors called kennings. A rocky headland might be remembered as the giant's tooth, a treacherous shoal as the serpent's bed. These vivid, imagery-rich descriptions transformed a bland coastline into a memorable story, ensuring that every cliff and cove was instantly recognizable. Mastering this mental atlas required a form of rigorous cognitive training that began in early childhood. A young apprentice would spend years listening to the chants, visualizing the journeys, and learning to associate each star, bird, and cloud with a specific part of the seascape until the knowledge was not just remembered but deeply embedded into his very identity. He learned to think in routes, not in isolated points, constantly updating his mental position based on the symphony of environmental cues. This raises a profound question about our own modern minds. We have outsourced memory to external devices, but what innate capacity for spatial reasoning and environmental awareness have we allowed to fade? These ancient mnemonic systems reveal a staggering potential of the human brain, a capacity to hold and manipulate incredibly complex spatial information through the art of story and song. Yet, no single method was ever used alone. The true genius of these ancient mariners lay in their ability to weave every thread of knowledge, the stars, the swells, the birds, the winds, and the mental map into a single, unshakable certainty of where they were and where they were destined to be. This seamless integration of knowledge was the navigator's true masterpiece. A master wayfinder never trusted just one sign. He lived in a state of constant, multi-sensory awareness, cross-referencing a dozen different inputs to build an unshakable certainty of his path. At any given moment, he was a living instrument processing data from the heavens, the sea, and the air. The star compass in his mind told him his direction, but the feel of the swell beneath the canoe confirmed it. The flight of a bird at dusk suggested land was near, but the sudden shift in cloud formation and the taste of the wind verified that the land was real and not a mirage. This was a redundant, fail-safe system. If clouds obscured the stars for a week, the swells and the birds could still guide him. If the ocean grew calm and the swells faded, the sun by day and the stars by night remained. This constant calibration was what separated a true navigator from a mere sailor. It required a mind capable of holding multiple streams of information in perfect balance, synthesizing them into a single, clear course of action. Consider the epic voyage to settle Hawaii, a journey of over 2,000 miles across the empty northern Pacific. For weeks, the navigators would have steered by the stars, holding a course toward the rising point of a specific constellation. Each dawn, they would check their alignment against the sun's arc. Throughout the day, they would monitor the direction of the primary easterly swell, feeling for any deviation. They would watch for birds, knowing that certain species would not appear until they were within a critical range of the Hawaiian archipelago. When conflicting information arose, perhaps a wind shift that pushed them off their stellar path, the navigator had to rely on his deep intuition, his feel for which signal was the true one and which was a temporary local effect. This holistic skill was forged through decades of training. Apprentices learned not just the individual methods, but more importantly, how to weigh them against each other. They were taken on long voyages and deliberately presented with confusing conditions, forced to resolve the contradictions and find their way. It was a cultivation of situational awareness on a grand scale, a mental discipline that parallels modern integrated bridge systems, where GPS, radar, and sonar data are all fused into a single display for the ship's captain. The ancient navigator's mind was that integrated system, a biological computer running on a lifetime of accumulated wisdom. This profound synthesis of mind and environment was the pinnacle of their art, and it was all made possible by one final, crucial element, the vessel that carried them. The vessel itself was the final, crucial instrument in this symphony of navigation. A Polynesian double-hull canoe was not merely a boat, it was a purpose-built extension of the navigator's own senses. Its twin hulls, connected by a spacious platform, offered remarkable stability on the open ocean. This stable platform was essential, providing a steady base from which to observe the stars and, more importantly, to feel the most subtle shifts in the ocean's swell patterns without the violent rocking of a single-hull vessel. Similarly, the sleek, shallow draft design of a Viking longship served a specific navigational strategy. It allowed these fierce explorers to sail up rivers and land directly on beaches, but it also gave them a crucial advantage when the winds failed. The banks of oars meant a voyage could continue even in a dead calm, a capability that prevented them from being trapped in the doldrums for weeks. Every element of these ancient ships was a direct response to the environment and the navigational methods of their creators. The lateen sail, used by Arab dhows in the Indian Ocean, was a triangular marvel of engineering. It could be angled to catch the monsoon winds from almost any direction, giving traders incredible maneuverability and the ability to sail much closer to the wind than square-rigged European ships of the same era. This single design feature unlocked the predictable yet shifting wind patterns of the monsoon, turning a seasonal weather system into a reliable maritime highway. The materials themselves were a testament to deep environmental knowledge. Pacific Islanders selected specific trees for their canoes based on the wood's natural resilience and buoyancy. They lashed the hulls together with intricately woven coconut fiber cordage, a technique that gave the entire structure a flexible strength, allowing it to flex with the waves rather than shatter against them. This incremental evolution of ship design, passed down through countless generations, directly expanded the range of the possible. A more seaworthy boat could carry more fresh water and supplies, enabling longer voyages beyond the range of land-based birds. A more efficient sail plan could harness fainter breezes, allowing explorers to venture into regions with less predictable winds. Each small improvement in hull shape, each refinement in rigging, was a key that unlocked a new part of the map. The boat was the navigator's partner, a trusted companion crafted from the very world it was designed to explore. Yet, even the most perfect vessel was useless without the deeply guarded knowledge of where to point its bow, a cultural treasure that was often protected with the utmost secrecy. This knowledge was far too precious to be held by just anyone. In ancient seafaring societies, the navigator was a figure of immense power and reverence, often occupying a role that blended chief, priest, and scientist. His understanding of the stars, swells, and winds was not merely a technical skill, it was a sacred trust, the key to his people's survival and prosperity. In Polynesia, this master was known as the Taha, a title that conveyed deep, esoteric knowledge. He was the living library of his culture, the one person who could recite the genealogies and chants that mapped the entire ocean. His training began as a small boy, sitting at the feet of his master, memorizing star paths and wave patterns through endless repetition and song. This was not a public education. The most critical knowledge was often kept within a single family line or a select guild of initiates, a closely guarded secret that maintained their political and social authority. To share it carelessly was to diminish its power and risk the very survival of the community. The Norse had their own version of this master, the Leithsögumaður or Pathfinder. He was the one who stood at the prow of the Viking longship, interpreting the subtle signs of the sea, guiding the crew through fog and darkness toward new lands for settlement or raiding. His word was law on the water, his decisions carrying the weight of life and death for every soul aboard. Indigenous narratives from across the Pacific are filled with the rituals and taboos that surrounded these voyages. Before departure, a navigator might undergo periods of isolation and fasting, seeking visions and blessings from ancestral spirits. Certain foods were forbidden, and strict silence was often observed during critical parts of the journey to maintain spiritual purity and concentration. The navigator was the bridge between the human and the divine, his success proof of his connection to the powers that govern the natural world. What immense pressure must that have been? The fate of an entire expedition, the hopes of families waiting for food and news, all rested on one man's ability to hold a perfect map in his mind and interpret a symphony of environmental cues without a single misstep. His art was the product of generations of accumulated observation, a profound ecological wisdom that understood the intricate connections between bird, fish, cloud, and current. He was the ultimate custodian of his people's memory and their greatest hope for the future. This education began not in a classroom but in the cradle of the waves. For a child born into a seafaring culture, learning to navigate was as natural as learning to walk. Their entire world was a living textbook, and every elder was a teacher. They absorbed knowledge through a slow, immersive process of osmosis, playing in the tidal pools and listening to the stories of their grandparents long before they ever set foot on a deep-sea canoe. The first lessons were simple and sensory. A father would point to a specific cloud formation and tell a story about the island it always stood above. A mother would ask her child to taste the air, to notice the subtle shift when the wind carried the scent of blooming mangroves from a distant coast. This was education woven into the fabric of daily life, a constant, gentle curriculum of observation. As the child grew, the training became more structured. In the calm, protected lagoons, a master navigator would take his young apprentices in a small canoe. He would have them lie down, close their eyes, and focus solely on the motion of the boat. Can you feel that long, gentle roll? That is the primary swell from the east. Now concentrate. Do you feel that smaller, quicker pulse beneath it? That is a local wind wave. This hands-on practice was essential for building the tactile sensitivity required for wave piloting. They learned to distinguish the character of different swells through their bodies long before they could name them. Storytelling and chants were the core of their intellectual training. These were not mere entertainment, they were sophisticated mnemonic databases. A single epic poem could encode the star paths for 10 different voyages, the sequence of seabirds to expect, and the names of the ancestral heroes who discovered each route. By singing these chants, the students were not just memorizing facts, they were building a rich, multi-sensory mental map, associating each navigational cue with a story and a rhythm that made it unforgettable. Educational theorists would classify this as a form of situated learning, where knowledge is constructed through direct, meaningful activity within a community of practice. The knowledge gained was not just explicit, something you could easily write down. It was tacit, a deep, intuitive understanding that lived in the navigator's muscles and instincts. He could not always explain precisely how he knew an island was near. He simply felt it in the confluence of signs, a certainty born from a lifetime of patterned experience. This stood in stark contrast to modern, formal education, which often prioritizes abstract, decontextualized information that exists separate from our daily lives. What we have lost is not intelligence, but a specific kind of attunement, a patient, deep listening to the environment that transforms observation into a form of prophecy. This profound connection to place meant that a master from the Marshall Islands would be utterly lost in the Mediterranean, and a Phoenician sailor would struggle in the Polynesian Pacific. Each system was a unique cultural dialect, a brilliant and specialized response to a specific corner of our vast, navigable world. Each ocean presented a different kind of puzzle, demanding a unique set of solutions from the sailors who challenged it. In the immense, island-scattered Pacific, the Polynesian navigator's world was defined by vast, empty blue horizons. His primary tools were celestial, relying on the grand star compass, or kavenga, a mental construct of the entire night sky. He thought in star paths, not coastlines, holding his course for weeks by the rising and setting of specific stars over a trackless sea. This was navigation by grand, celestial architecture. Contrast this with the Mediterranean, a narrow, crowded sea ringed by mountains. Here, Phoenician and Greek sailors were masters of coastal piloting. They rarely lost sight of land, navigating from headland to headland, using the sun's position and their intimate knowledge of local landmarks. They developed tools for precision, like the Greek pelikanon, a simple but effective wooden crossbar used to measure the altitude of the North Star above the horizon, giving them a more exact reading of their north-south position. This was a world of fine-grained detail, of recognizing a specific cliff face or the smell of a particular river delta. Meanwhile, in the Indian Ocean, Arab and Indian traders surrendered to a different rhythm entirely, that of the monsoon winds. Their navigation was not about fighting the elements but about harmonizing with a planetary breath. For 6 months, the winds blew steadily from the northeast, carrying their lateen-sailed house from Arabia to the spice ports of India. Then they waited. When the winds reversed to the southwest, it was the signal to load their ships with pepper and gems and begin the long journey home. Their calendar was written in the sky, their routes dictated by an immutable seasonal clock. Yet these distinct worlds were not entirely separate. When Roman merchants, guided by their coastal methods, first ventured into the Indian Ocean to trade with India, they had to adapt. They learned to read the monsoon patterns from Arab and Indian pilots, combining their own stellar knowledge with this new understanding of the wind's grand schedule. This fusion of techniques opened up a maritime Silk Road, connecting empires across thousands of miles of ocean. So what fundamental thread tied these diverse systems together? It was a universal reliance on patterns, whether it was the pattern of stars in the Pacific, the pattern of coastal features in the Mediterranean, or the pattern of the winds in the Indian Ocean. Every successful navigator was a master of recognizing and trusting the consistent rhythms of the natural world. They all understood that the environment was not chaotic, but filled with reliable, repeating signs. This leads to the ultimate mystery. How did the very first navigator on the very first voyage discover that a specific star rising in the east meant an island lay in that direction? The initial discoveries must have been acts of incredible courage, voyages into the pure unknown where the patterns we now take for granted were still being written. The first person to sail beyond the horizon did so without a map or a single story to guide them. This was the ultimate leap of faith, a venture into a void where every rule of navigation had to be invented in the moment. How did they learn the routes? The answer is not a single story but a tapestry woven from strategy, accident, and profound observation. One of the most compelling theories points to the power of intentional exploration using a brilliant counter-intuitive strategy. Early navigators in the Pacific may have deliberately sailed against the prevailing trade winds when heading out to explore. This was not madness, but a calculated safety measure. If they found nothing, the powerful, steady winds would be at their back for a swift and guaranteed return home. This method, often called latitude sailing, allowed them to venture east into the unknown with a built-in safety net, using the stars to hold a consistent north-south line until they chose to turn back. But not all discoveries were planned. The vast ocean currents are a powerful conveyor belt, and accidental drift voyages must have played a role. A fishing canoe caught in a storm, a group of villagers swept out to sea on a raft. These unlucky souls could have been carried for weeks, eventually making landfall on a shore their people had never seen. If any survived, and if they managed to build a new vessel, they could have theoretically carried knowledge of that new route back home, transforming a tragedy into a discovered highway. The archaeological record of the Lapita people's expansion across the Pacific strongly supports a deliberate, not random process. Their distinctive pottery appears on island after island in a clear, eastward-moving wave, a trail of cultural breadcrumbs that suggests well-provisioned, intentional colonization voyages. They were not lost, they were moving. They were likely following nature's own signposts long before they fully understood their final destination. The flight paths of migratory birds, which they would have observed from their home islands, pointed like arrows toward land. Floating debris, like uncommon seeds or logs with unfamiliar insects, carried on the currents would have told them that something, somewhere, lay upwind or upstream. Each of these clues was a piece of a puzzle, encouraging another voyage, another look beyond the known world. What cultural force could compel a person to pack their family and belongings into a canoe and sail toward an empty horizon? It must have been a powerful mix of necessity and curiosity, perhaps driven by overpopulation, political conflict, or simply an unquenchable human desire to see what was over the next wave. The risks were astronomical. A single miscalculation in reading the swells, a prolonged period of overcast skies, or a failure to find fresh water could mean vanishing forever. Yet they went, and when they succeeded, that hard-won knowledge was not written down. It was woven into a chant, carved into the memory of a master navigator, and passed to his apprentice. Each successful voyage added a new star, a new bird, a new swell pattern to the collective memory of the culture. The origin of wayfinding was this slow, courageous accumulation of truth, one daring journey at a time. The silent testimony of shipwrecks confirms what the chants and stories have long proclaimed. On the seafloor near Uluburun in modern Turkey, a ship from the late Bronze Age lay preserved for over 3,000 years, a time capsule from an era of astonishing maritime trade. Its cargo was a global inventory in a single hull containing 10 tons of Cypriot copper, a ton of tin from Central Asia, ebony from Africa, and glass from Mesopotamia. This vessel was not sailing a short coastal route. It was on a direct, long-distance run across the eastern Mediterranean, carrying raw materials for empires. The very existence of this shipwreck proves that by 1400 BC, sailors possessed the knowledge and confidence to undertake complex, scheduled voyages across open water, moving goods on a scale that fueled the Bronze Age world. This was not an isolated case. Across the Pacific, the story of human expansion is written in broken pottery. The Lapita people left a trail of their distinctive, intricately patterned ceramics, a cultural signature that begins in the islands near New Guinea and marches eastward across thousands of miles of ocean, all the way to Samoa and Tonga. Each new archaeological site is another dot on the map of their incredible journey. This was not a random scattering of castaways. The settlements appear suddenly and fully formed on pristine islands, complete with evidence of transported crops and domesticated animals. These were deliberate colonization missions, entire communities setting sail with the plants, animals, and tools needed to build a new life, a clear signal of intentional and successful navigation. The tools themselves are rare and precious finds. On a Norse farm in Greenland, archaeologists uncovered a simple wooden disc. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, but closer inspection REVEALED, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter carved along its edge. This was a sun compass, a Viking tool used to track the shadow of a central gnomon. By rotating the disc throughout the day to keep the shadow aligned with the correct notch for that time of year, a navigator could find true north even when the sun was not at its apex. This artifact is a physical bridge, connecting the abstract skill of celestial navigation to a tangible, handheld device that supplemented the natural methods. How does this physical evidence change our perspective? It grounds the epic oral histories in undeniable fact. We are no longer just listening to legends of great navigators. We are holding the tools they used and seeing the wreckage of the ships they sailed. Every new discovery, from an ancient harbor structure to a single fishing weight found on a previously uninhabited island, pushes back the timeline of human seafaring and deepens our appreciation for its sophistication. This material record does not just confirm the past, it directly connects to the living traditions that have managed to survive into the modern world, offering a chance to rediscover a lost way of seeing. That living connection to the past, once nearly severed, is now beating with a powerful new rhythm. Across the Pacific, a cultural renaissance is underway, a deliberate and passionate movement to reclaim the ancient art of wayfinding. This is not a historical reenactment. It is a living, breathing tradition being passed to a new generation. At the heart of this revival is the Polynesian Voyaging Society and its legendary canoe, Hōkūleʻa. Built in the 1970s, Hōkūleʻa was a physical answer to a haunting question. Had Polynesians intentionally discovered and settled these islands, or were they simply accidental castaways? In 1976, Hōkūleʻa silenced all doubt by sailing from Hawaii to Tahiti using only traditional navigation methods, guided by the master Micronesian navigator Mau Piailug. That voyage was more than a proof of concept. It was a spark that ignited a fire of cultural pride and identity. Since then, Hōkūleʻa has sailed across the world. Its twin holds a symbol of a people rediscovering their own greatness. Modern navigators, like the Society's PWO navigator Kalpa Babayan, speak of this not as a hobby, but as a responsibility. In interviews, he describes the process as a constant dialogue, blending the star compass of his ancestors with his understanding of modern oceanography and meteorology. He does not see these as conflicting, but as complementary layers of truth. The challenge is immense. How do you teach a skill that was once learned through a lifetime of sensory immersion to students who have grown up with smartphones and global positioning systems? The answer lies in a new kind of school where classrooms are the open ocean and textbooks are replaced by the feel of the wind and the position of the stars. Young apprentices spend weeks at sea with their mentors, learning to quiet the noise of modern life and listen to the older, deeper language of the natural world. These revivals are a profound statement about our relationship with the planet. In an age of climate change and environmental crisis, this ancient knowledge promotes a philosophy of deep observation and sustainability. To navigate by the stars is to understand your place in a vast cosmic system. To read the ocean swells is to acknowledge your intimate connection to global weather patterns. It is a slower, more humble way of moving through the world, one that stands in stark contrast to the relentless pace of digital technology. This living bridge to ancestral wisdom offers more than just hope, it offers a different way of being. It asks us to consider what we have sacrificed for the convenience of a screen that always tells us exactly where we are, but so seldom reminds us of who we are and how we are connected to everything around us. The quiet hum of a global positioning system receiver represents the final note in a symphony that once filled the oceans. This profound shift did not happen by accident. It was the result of a powerful collision between worlds, where colonial powers arrived with their printed charts and magnetic compasses and dismissed the sophisticated knowledge of indigenous navigators as mere superstition. The very act of drawing a line on a map was an act of possession, a declaration that this new, portable form of knowledge was superior to the living, oral traditions that had guided people for millennia. European explorers, armed with their instruments, often depended on local pilots to guide them through treacherous waters they could not navigate themselves, yet they rarely credited that expertise in their logs. This systematic suppression was both cultural and economic. As colonial administrations took control, traditional voyaging was frequently banned or severely restricted. The great canoes were left to rot on beaches, not because they were ineffective, but because independent mobility was a threat to control. The knowledge itself was targeted. Missionaries condemned chants and rituals as pagan, severing the spiritual connection that gave the navigator his authority and the knowledge its sacred context. An elder from the Marshall Islands once lamented that when the children were taken away to schools where they learned a different history and a different science, the chain of memory was broken. The ocean was no longer their classroom, and the stories of the stars were replaced by textbooks. Industrialization accelerated this loss, introducing steam and steel. Suddenly, a ship could power directly into the wind, ignoring the seasonal rhythms of the monsoon. It no longer mattered if you could read the swells when an engine could push you through a dead calm. Globalized trade routes favored speed and cargo capacity over environmental harmony, creating a new, mechanical relationship with the sea. The cognitive consequence of this transition is immense. We outsourced our attention. Where a navigator once held a dynamic, multi-sensory model of the world in his mind, we now glance at a single screen. We gained incredible precision, but we lost the conversation. The cultural cost is the disconnection from a heritage that understood humans as part of an ecological web, not as masters of it. This erosion forces a difficult question. What other intricate understandings of the world have we allowed to fade for the sake of convenience? The protection of intangible cultural heritage is not about preserving a museum piece, but about recognizing that these ways of knowing offer unique insights into sustainability, memory, and our place in the natural world. The very forces that made these ancient methods seem obsolete were the same ones that set the stage for a revolution in how we would come to see our entire planet. A floating sliver of iron, magnetized and balanced on a pin, began to sever a connection that had taken millennia to build. The magnetic compass, first documented in China during the Han Dynasty, represented a fundamental shift in human orientation. No longer was direction something felt in the bones or read in the stars. It was now a piece of data presented by a trembling needle inside a closed box. This revolutionary tool spread west along the Silk Road, transforming Arab and European navigation by the 12th and 13th centuries. Suddenly, a captain could hold his course through days of overcast skies, his confidence placed not in the invisible patterns of the sea, but in the silent pivot of a magnetized metal shard. This was not an instant replacement, but a slow, profound merger. For centuries, the compass supplemented the old ways, creating a powerful hybrid system. A Portuguese caravel captain sailing around Africa would still watch the North Star's altitude to gauge his latitude, but he would trust the compass to tell him which way his bow was pointing through the night. He would still observe the flight of seabirds, but the compass gave him the courage to sail farther from their reassuring range. These tools enabled the age of exploration, turning the vast Atlantic from a terrifying barrier into a navigable highway. Yet this new precision came with a hidden cost. The knowledge of the sea, once a distributed, communal wisdom carried in the minds of many sailors, began to centralize. The captain with the compass and the chart held a new kind of authority, one based on exclusive access to instruments and written tables. The average sailor no longer needed to understand why the swell was shifting or what a specific cloud formation meant. He simply needed to follow orders and watch the sails. His relationship with the ocean became more transactional, less conversational. How did it feel for an old navigator, trained from childhood to feel his way across the water, to be told his hard-won sensory knowledge was now secondary to the reading of a tiny needle? The compass did not lie, but it also did not teach you to smell the land on the wind or feel the echo of an island in the waves. It offered a brilliant, simplified answer to the question of direction, but in doing so, it made the deeper, more complex questions about place seem unnecessary. This was the beginning of a great forgetting, a quiet trade where we gained unwavering direction but lost a piece of our dialogue with the world. That tiny, trembling compass needle was only the beginning of a technological march that would culminate in the silent signals of the global positioning system. We now carry in our pockets a capability that would have seemed like pure magic to the greatest ancient navigators. With a quick glance, a screen reveals our position on the planet to within a few meters, an astonishing feat of precision. But this invites a direct and fascinating question. In a head-to-head test across the open ocean, could a traditional wayfinder still find a small island as reliably as a GPS receiver? The answer is not a simple yes or no, but a revealing story of trade-offs. Experimental voyages like those of Hōkūleʻa have provided the data. On its long journeys, guided by masters like Nainoa Thompson, the canoe regularly made landfall within a target zone of just 20 miles after a voyage of over 2,000 miles. This is not guesswork, it is a statistically remarkable result proving the system's profound effectiveness over vast distances. The primary limitation is not accuracy, but consistency and cognitive demand. A master navigator must remain in a state of intense, unbroken concentration for weeks, synthesizing a constant stream of environmental data. A single overcast night or a sudden storm that churns the ocean's swell patterns can introduce small errors that accumulate over time. The modern GPS, by contrast, offers near-instantaneous, unwavering pinpoint accuracy that is utterly unaffected by weather, time of day, or the operator's fatigue. It democratizes navigation, making it accessible to anyone with a device, not just a lifetime apprentice. This incredible convenience, however, comes with its own set of vulnerabilities. The entire global positioning system relies on a fragile web of infrastructure, a constellation of satellites, ground stations, and complex software. A solar flare, a cyber attack, or even simple signal jamming could theoretically render the system useless. Furthermore, psychologists and maritime safety experts point to a phenomenon known as navigational complacency. When we blindly follow a screen, we stop paying attention to the world outside the window. We lose the ability to notice that the swell is building in a way that suggests a coming storm, or that the color of the water has shifted to the murky green that warns of a shoal. The ancient methods, by their very nature, build a resilient and deeply connected mariner. You cannot navigate by the stars without understanding your place in the cosmos. You cannot follow the birds without learning their ecology. This knowledge forms a backup system woven into the fabric of the environment itself, a system that cannot be hacked or switched off. So the comparison is not about declaring one system superior, but about understanding their distinct purposes. Modern instrumental navigation is a tool of immense efficiency and scalability, perfect for coordinating global trade and travel. Ancient natural navigation is a discipline of profound intelligence and resilience, a way of knowing that binds the traveler to the world. In an era where our technological systems can sometimes feel precariously complex, the old ways ask us a vital question. What essential skills of perception and adaptation have we set aside, and might we need to rediscover them not as a hobby, but as a fundamental layer of our own survival? The brain of a master navigator was a living, breathing chart room. Cognitive science now reveals that these experts did not just remember facts, they constructed entire worlds inside their minds, using mental tools we are only beginning to fully understand. At the core of their ability were two fundamental strategies: dead reckoning and piloting. Dead reckoning was the continuous mental math of the sea. A navigator would constantly estimate his position based on his last known point, factoring in his perceived speed, the direction he had traveled, and the time elapsed. It was an internal calculation of velocity and trajectory, a feeling of being here, moving this fast for this long. Piloting, by contrast, was the art of using specific landmarks, but on a grand, oceanic scale. A landmark was not just a mountain, it could be a unique star rising over a particular atoll, a distinct pattern of intersecting swells, or the specific bird species that appeared at a certain longitude. Their minds seamlessly blended these two methods, using piloting to correct the inevitable, small errors that accumulated in dead reckoning over a long voyage. This cognitive feat relied on a brain physically shaped by its task. Landmark studies of London taxi drivers, who must memorize the city's entire labyrinth of streets, show a measurable enlargement in their posterior hippocampus, the brain region critical for spatial memory and navigation. The brains of ancient master navigators, constantly holding vast mental maps of the Pacific, would have undergone a similar, likely even more profound, physical adaptation. Their knowledge was not a simple list, it was a complex hierarchical structure. They used a technique cognitive scientists call chunking, grouping individual cues into larger, meaningful patterns. A single chant did not list 30 separate stars, but rather told the story of a voyage, chunking the stars into sequences that represented legs of the journey. This made the information far easier to store and recall. Before setting sail, a navigator would engage in intense mental simulation, walking through the entire journey in his mind. He would visualize the changing night sky, anticipate the feel of different swell patterns, and rehearse his responses to potential storms or overcast skies. This was not daydreaming, it was a rigorous cognitive exercise that primed his brain for the real challenge. The modern navigator, by contrast, often relies on a very different cognitive strategy. Instead of building a rich internal model of the environment, he learns to expertly operate an external interface, the GPS. His skill is in interpreting the data on the screen, not in synthesizing a dozen natural signals. One method builds a resilient, self-contained sense of place, while the other creates an efficient but potentially fragile dependency on technology. This distinction points to a stunning facet of human potential. The ancient navigator's mind demonstrates that our brains are not fixed, but are dynamic organs that can be sculpted by deep, dedicated practice into instruments of extraordinary perception. What latent capacities for environmental awareness might we all possess, waiting to be unlocked by a different way of paying attention? This journey into the mind completes our understanding of their method, but it forces a final, lingering question about the world they saw so clearly. The ocean was not an empty space to be crossed, but a sacred realm to be honored. For ancient navigators, every voyage was a spiritual negotiation, a delicate dance with forces far greater than themselves. This was not a science separate from faith, but a single, unified discipline where the physical and metaphysical worlds converged. In Polynesian cosmology, the concept of Va described the relational space that connects all things: the land, the sea, the sky, and the people. A navigator was not simply moving from point A to point B. He was actively tending to the sacred relationships between these realms, ensuring his journey maintained the harmony of the whole. His success depended on this balance as much as on his knowledge of the stars. Similarly, Norse sagas are filled with accounts of sailors seeking omens before a voyage, interpreting the flight of a raven or the pattern of waves as signs from the gods. They believed in a woven fate where their courage and skill intersected with the will of divine forces, and to ignore these signs was to invite disaster. This spiritual connection was cultivated through ritual and reverence. Before a long journey, a Polynesian navigator might undergo a period of purification, abstaining from certain foods and observing strict silence to sharpen his senses and demonstrate his respect to the ancestral spirits, or Aumakua, who are believed to guide the canoe. The ocean itself was seen as a living entity, a god named Kanaloa, whose moods and currents demanded acknowledgement, not defiance. A modern Hawaiian kumu or teacher might explain that this worldview fostered a profound sense of humility. You did not conquer the sea, you asked for its permission. You did not master the winds, you learned to work with their intention. This stands in stark contrast to the modern instrumental view, which often frames nature as a resource to be managed or an obstacle to be overcome with technology. What does this ancient spiritual approach to navigation teach us today? It offers a powerful lesson in interdependence. The navigator's survival was inextricably linked to his ability to listen, to observe, and to respect the complex systems around him. He understood that he was a single participant in a vast, living cosmos, not its central manager. This philosophy of wayfinding reinforced core cultural values of patience, observation, and reciprocity. The journey was as much about the inner transformation of the navigator, his discipline, his focus, his connection to his ancestors, as it was about the physical discovery of new lands. In an age of climate crisis and environmental disconnection, this holistic vision resonates deeply. It suggests that true wayfinding, whether across an ocean or through the challenges of our time, begins not with domination, but with a reverent and attentive relationship to the world we inhabit. That deep, reverent conversation with the world is not a relic of the past, but a vital blueprint for our future. In an era defined by climate change and fragile supply chains, the ancient navigator's art offers profound lessons in resilience. Their entire system was built on a foundation of deep environmental awareness, a principle we urgently need to rediscover. They understood that survival depended on listening to the planet, not dominating it. This philosophy of attunement is the exact opposite of our modern tendency to live in climate-controlled bubbles, shielded from the natural signals that once guided human life. We're learning how to read the subtle cues in our own local environments, whether it's the behavior of local birds or the shift in wind patterns before a storm, reconnects us to the living systems that support us. It transforms the abstract concept of climate change into a tangible, observable reality, fostering a sense of stewardship that no documentary can fully impart. This is not about romanticizing the past, but about securing our future. Their methods were inherently sustainable because they had to be, a truth we are now being forced to confront on a global scale. The Navigator's toolkit was a masterpiece of redundancy. If the stars vanished behind clouds, the swells remained. If the ocean grew calm, the birds and winds could still point the way. This built-in backup system ensured that no single point of failure could lead to catastrophe. Our modern technological systems, for all their precision, often lack this fundamental resilience. We rely on a centralized electrical grid, a global internet, and satellite networks that are vulnerable to solar flares, cyber attacks, or simple human error. What would it mean to build redundancy into our own communities, to develop local food sources, decentralized energy, and the skills to navigate without a digital screen? This is not a call to abandon technology, but to balance it with the timeless wisdom of having multiple, independent pathways to our goals. Their success was also rooted in slow, observant decision-making. A master navigator did not make sudden course corrections based on a single piece of data. He would watch, wait, and cross-reference multiple signs before committing to a new direction. This patient, holistic analysis stands in stark contrast to the reactive, often impulsive pace of modern life, where decisions are made from fragmented information on a screen. Initiatives in ecological education are already weaving these principles into their curricula. Students are taught to become natural navigators in their own bioregions, learning to identify edible plants, read animal tracks, and understand watersheds. They are, in essence, learning to read the landscape with the same fluency that a Polynesian wayfinder read the ocean. This knowledge builds a different kind of confidence, one that is self-reliant and deeply connected to place. How can we integrate this mindset into our daily routines? It could start with something as simple as planting a vegetable garden, learning the names of the trees in our local park, or simply turning off the GPS on a familiar drive to re-engage our own sense of direction. These small acts of reconnection are steps toward a more resilient and aware existence. The ultimate lesson from the ancient mariners is not a specific technique, but a mindset of humble observation and adaptive intelligence. It is a reminder that the most sophisticated system for navigating an uncertain future may not be in a server farm, but in the quiet, persistent wisdom of paying attention. A great deal of what we think we know about ancient navigation is actually a tangle of myth and misunderstanding. The most persistent of these is the romantic notion of the accidental voyage, the idea that ancient explorers were simply blown off course by storms and stumbled upon new lands by pure luck. This image of desperate castaways, while dramatic, is overwhelmingly contradicted by the archaeological record. We now know that the colonization of the remote Pacific, for instance, required the deliberate transport of an entire survival kit. Settlers brought with them live pigs, chickens, and dogs, along with seedlings of essential crops like taro, breadfruit, and coconut. You do not pack your family, your livestock, and the very seeds of your future onto a fragile canoe and set sail into a storm hoping for the best. These were meticulously planned missions of colonization, funded and organized by entire communities with a clear intention to find and settle new islands. Another common misconception is that these methods were primitive or universally the same. Hollywood often depicts a generic ancient sailor looking at the stars, as if there was one single, simple method used from the Mediterranean to Polynesia. The reality is that these systems were as diverse as the cultures that created them. A Viking pathfinder reading the sun's shadow on a wooden disc was using a fundamentally different cognitive tool than a Marshallese navigator feeling the echo of a swell in his canoe. One system was designed for the narrow, landmark-rich seas of Europe, while the other was perfected for the vast, empty horizons of the open Pacific. To lump them together is to ignore their unique cultural genius. Why do these simplified myths endure? They often stem from a colonial perspective that was unable or unwilling to recognize the sophisticated intellectual traditions of indigenous peoples. It was easier to label their achievements as luck or instinct than to admit they possessed a complex science that rivaled, and in some ways surpassed, early European methods. Clearing away these fictions is not just about historical accuracy, it is an act of respect. It allows us to see these navigators for what they truly were, not superstitious wanderers, but the finest empirical scientists of their age, whose mastery of the natural world remains one of humanity's most stunning intellectual achievements. Their legacy is a profound reminder that our greatest journeys are guided not by gadgets, but by wisdom. The ancient navigators who mastered the oceans without a single modern instrument accomplished one of humanity's most stunning intellectual feats. They did not see the sea as an empty void to be conquered, but as a living text to be read, a dynamic map written in the language of swells, stars, and birds. Their art was a complete system, blending rigorous observation with deep intuition, a testament to a form of intelligence that was both scientific and spiritual. This was not a primitive skill, but a sophisticated cultural technology, honed over generations and passed down through chants and stories. Today, as we stand at the helm of a digital age, their methods speak to us of resilience. They teach us that true wayfinding is about more than just reaching a destination. It is about understanding our place within a vast, interconnected world. It is about the patience to observe, the courage to trust our senses, and the humility to listen to the planet. The revival of these practices is not a rejection of technology, but a vital reclamation of a different kind of knowledge, one that builds self-reliance and a deeper connection to our environment. Let their story inspire you to look up at the night sky with new curiosity, to notice the direction of the wind, or to simply wonder at the hidden patterns in the world around you. Which of these ancient skills would you choose to learn? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this voyage into the past, subscribe for more journeys into the mysteries of history.